Growing up haunted. This story is very true and I have told it many times. I talk about it fairly openly, but some of it sounds quite outlandish, and I acknowledge that. That said, it is all true and I am sharing it now here for your enjoyment. Settle in. It's a long one with some twists and turns that span over a decade. I'm almost 35, but when I was 13 in 2003, my family moved into a home that was built in the 50s in a suburb just outside of Baltimore, Maryland. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, and over the years, my parents put over millions of dollars into additions, repairs, and beautification, from landscaping to new rooms entirely to a wrap-around deck. It ended up being a really nice house and was kind of the envy of a lot of my friends. But when we first moved in, it just had sort of a creepy old house vibe. We had heard from the neighbors that the couple that had lived in it previous was an elderly couple, and while the man was very jovial, the wife was not. The husband died in the house because of courts he did, but that would later explain some of the impy's paranormal behavior. My brother and I were both immediately drawn to but also sketched out by the basement. It was a clinch unfinished basement. Dirty cement floors, scuffed cement walls, dank, musty, and only a couple of those janky hanging light bulbs like Uncle Rob and Aunt Georgette's house in Home Alone 2. The first few months we lived there, I avoided the basement for the most part because I had no reason to be down there, and it was spooky. My brother and I had our own separate rooms next to each other on the second floor of the house. I have never in my life had any issues with sleepwalking, and I have never done it, not as a child, not as an adult. But one night I woke and was immediately jerked awake by the sensation of cold cement under my feet. I opened my eyes and looked up and I'm standing in the basement. I had walked from my bedroom on the second floor all the way down to the basement and was just standing there. I hightailed it back upstairs and tried my best to forget about it. A few months into living in the home, I took up playing drums and making music in the basement. So I spent more and more time down there and got used to it. It became like a second home initially, especially once I started recording and having band practice down there with various bands I joined. That would greet you with a text greeting across the front of the DVD player, and it said, "Welcome to Toshiba DVD Entertainment Center." One night I'm laying in bed and suddenly my DVD player turns on and that message comes across the screen. Didn't think much of it, but I kind of did in the same time. Some time later, my brother and I were outside playing on the trampoline, and I had prepared some coffee for myself, but had not yet turned on the coffee pot to brew it. In fact, if I remember correctly, I haven't even plugged it in. But I didn't put the coffee grounds in the filter and the water in the tank. When my brother and I came back inside from playing, the coffee was brewed. Our parents were out for the day. It was little things like this that would happen even so often. But there was nothing crazy, nothing malicious, and because we were young and stupid, we did try to communicate with whatever we believed was in the house. But things would slowly change. Some of the incidents got a little bit more dark, strange, etc. In 2007 we held Thanksgiving at our house and the whole family was there. At this time I had moved downstairs to the front master bedroom. In the house there were 3 bedrooms upstairs, 2 smaller bedrooms and an upstairs master. And then downstairs there was the master bedroom on its own. We had a really big kitchen and my parents had the floors redone to be this heavy stone. Remember that for later. But the kitchen was very long and just big in general. I was outside getting some more sodas to bring inside from the back porch, and when I came, my aunt said, "Damn, you are fast." And I asked what she was talking about, and she told me she was just saw me walking into my bedroom like 5 seconds earlier. So she was someone that looked like me walk into my bedroom, which was across the other side of the kitchen and around the corner. And again, not too crazy, but weird. 2008 was the first time that something undeniably bizarre, and most likely paranormal happened. But nobody can really deny it. My brother in home and getting ready to go to a friend's house. At this point I was 18 and he was 14. His body lived up the street from us. He goes to my room to tell me that he is leaving for the evening and to let our parents know as they are out. My door is cracked and the light is off and it's completely dark because it's about 7 or 8 at night in November. He gets no response from me and figures I'm probably trying to scare him because we used to do that all the time. So he just turns to leave, and when he does, the door closes and he hears the lock turn. He jiggles the doorknob and the door is locked. He knocks again and now he's kind of frustrated and he once again tells me to knock it off and that he is leaving and to tell our mom where he is when she gets home. He gets no response, so again he turns to walk away. He hears the lock turn again and the door opens on its own just a little bit. It was just a crack. At this point, even though he's very sure it's me trying to scare him, he hurries out the front door and he's horrified to discover that my car is gone because I'm in another part of town watching a football game at a friend's house. So he takes off up the street to his friend's house and calls the police. I come home from the football game and I see police cars whizzing by me and they are headed to my house. They are kicking in doors and throwing open closets, checking even possible entrance. No sign of forced entry, and obviously there is nobody in the home. It was just an unexplained thing that happened. Throughout the years, as we grew up and became young adults, we stayed together in the home, but there was a lot of turmoil. I began dating somebody and she moved in with me and my family, and there ended up just being a lot of tension in the home. A lot of fighting, a lot of anger, a lot of negative energy. It got to a point where the house almost felt alive, like there was just this horrible energy. Sometimes my ex and I would sit in the car for an hour and just look at the house, dreading going inside. In 2011, my brother joined the Marines and was sent overseas to Afghanistan. During this time, some things happened with the house where it went into like a default situation. Not super proud of it, but my family basically abandoned the house. But because the house was financed through Bank of America, they had this backlog of homes in the tens of thousands. So rather than swooping up and grabbing the foreclosed home, it sat for almost half a decade. In this time, I converted the house into a personal training studio and music studio full on. I had parties there. It was a pretty good time, to be honest. But one day, while doing a photo shoot for a record I had made in the basement, myself and at least half a dozen other people who were in the basement, just taking pictures and goofing around, when we all heard the sound of footsteps above up in the kitchen. Heavy, lumbering footsteps. We all fell silent and we were looking at each other as if it confirmed that we all heard the same thing. We all ran upstairs and there was nobody there. At that point, everybody said their goodbyes and left me in the house alone. Skip ahead a few more years, and it is now 2014 and my family has moved back in the foreclosed home. I know, really cheesy stuff. I was under the impression that they were paying for the house again and had just taken it back. So it was pretty cool to have everybody back together, although there was still some fighting. My brother had come back from Afghanistan, and upon returning he started having some weird things happen to him. He would wake up choking his girlfriend at the time. He would wake up in the middle of the night, ravenously hungry every night almost at the same exact time. He would just sit up in the bed sometimes and get this evil dark look on his face. My mom described it as pure evil. He would just act really strange and malicious. He would wake up bleeding, but with no cuts or discernible places the blood would be coming from. There would just be blood on his pillows or sheets. It got to the point where he ended up going to a medium. My brother has never really believed in psychosis and our mediums, but he experienced all the stuff we experienced as kids. So he was curious. This medium told him that he most likely brought an entity back from the Middle East. Not a ghost, not a demon, just an entity. It had a feminine energy, but it wasn't female. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but that's what he was talking about. But the medium told him that it was very possessive and obsessed with him, and latched onto him because of his negative energy. It fed off of his negative energy as he was a drinker and has always had a temper. So as the years went on, my family eventually moved out of that house one more time, and I stayed behind. This was late 2015. In fact, it was my birthday. On the night of my birthday, I was washing some dishes after making myself some dinner, and while at the sink, in that big kitchen with those stone floors, I heard the unmistakable sound of somebody's feet. Bare feet marching across that kitchen and coming right up behind me fast. Not running, just walking with purpose. It was so visceral and so real. I remember hearing that sound all the time growing up as my mom would angrily walk across that kitchen floor frustrated with something low. Because the floors were stone and because the kitchen was quite cavernous, things in the pantries would rattle and shake, and you could really hear that stone thump, thump, and thumbs up. In a split second, I thought somebody had broken into the house, so I quickly turned around with whatever was in my hand at the time that I was washing and was ready to strike. Nothing was there. I dropped what I was doing and I left the house. At that time, the family had left the two family cats with me. They were my companions during the 8 or so months I lived in that house alone. At the time, I was also sort of seeing someone who was into spirituality and astrology and that kind of thing. I never really believed in any of it. Didn't believe in mediums even though my brother had gotten the information he had received. But this time, evening and what followed kind of confirmed the reality of it. So I'm in the car and I'm on my Bluetooth and I'm just circling the neighborhood talking to the girl I was seeing. She keeps telling me to hold so she can tap in or whatever she's doing. She never come to be a psychic, but she was sensitive to certain things. She had also said long before any of this ever happened that she did not like the energy in that house. But while we were on the phone, I keep circling the neighborhood and every time I get close to the house, I get a sick feeling in my stomach. It feels evil, it feels malicious, and it feels like it wants to hurt me. I keep looking in my rear view mirror, waiting to see something in the back seat. Something I don't want to see. She goes quiet for a good 20 seconds and I just say, it is in the car with me, isn't it? And after a brief pause she says, yeah, but it's also back at the house waiting for you. It can be in multiple places at once and it knows that you know it's there and it's waiting for you. In retrospect, that is a chilling thing to tell somebody low, but she tells me not to go back to the house, and if I do, to just gather the cats quickly and get out. At this time, I didn't really have anywhere to go. I couldn't go to any of my family members because a ghost or goblin was scaring me, so she said the other option was to just stand my ground and hope for the best. She told me what words to say and how to say them. She told me to sleep with the lights on and just keep my guard up and be strong. And in the meantime, she would contact a friend of hers in Connecticut who was a medium. So I did that and I had a very long sleepless night. The next evening, she comes over to tell me what her medium friend told her over the phone. Mind you, this medium friend of hers and I had only ever met one time, and it was in passing, just a quick hello and goodbye in another part of the town. She's never been to my home. She doesn't know the history of the home and she didn't know me very well at all. So the girl that I was seeing told me that her medium friend said that the entity was that attached to my brother detached from him, and stayed in that house because it liked all the negative energy caused by all of our fighting and turmoil. This girl described the house I was living in without ever having set foot in it. She knew the layout and she said that it was occupying that front master bedroom downstairs, which was my bedroom, where I used to sleep. She said that's where it builds up all of its energy. Interesting fact, when my ex and I lived in that room, she would often get really bad headaches whenever we were in that room. I had a headache. But she said there was a lot of turmoil and fighting in that room. Specifically, she had even knew about some of the sexual proactivities I had, like handcuffs and things like that, crazy stuff. But she said that the entity was looking for a new host, and because I was the only one that was there, it was looking for me. So the girl I was seeing at the time brought over some sage and saged the entire inside and outside of the house. And we said some sort of prayer like thing, and after that I never had any issues in that house again. I ended up living there for another year and a half before I moved away to another state. And eventually the bank came for the house once and for all the specs.
Real fear.
I hit something strange on the road. Now it's following me. As I stood over the carcass lying in front of me, I felt like I couldn't move. Maybe there was some residual shock from the crash, but I feel that it was just a small part of it. It's that the more I looked, the less sense everything made. Everything I knew started to feel just like slightly wrong. I had lived in these woods my whole life and had never seen anything like that. I had run over a few animals before. On accident, I mean. Of course, it happens when you lived around these parts. But it always left me a deep sadness for days. There isn't much you can do about it. It's not like wild animals are taught to check the road before crossing. They just do, and always at the worst time. It felt different this time. Something inside me told me that it was a good thing that happened, that I had done a good thing accidentally, but a good thing nonetheless. The thing did not look benevolent, unlike anything else that belonged to this forest. It looked like something more dangerous than an apex predator, something above the food chain, above us. The first thing that struck me was its limbs. Some of them were now crooked from the impact with my car, but that actually made them look less abnormal. They were long, thin, and sharp like a sort of blade. It's the only way I could describe it. It felt like their only purpose was to move and kill. I started thinking about something I had heard but sometime before that night. A couple of hunters had warned that town something new was living in the woods. They had found a dead bear while out hunting, but said that what killed it couldn't have been a wolf or a big cat or something else others, since it wouldn't make sense for them to cause a scene like the only one they found. They said there was blood everywhere. The bear had its rib cage sliced open and its heart ripped out of it. What killed it, it didn't take a single bite out of the body, and neither did any of the other animals. It's like something had marked its territory and asserted its dominance in the woods. They said the forest looked deserted, that it was completely silent as if something had scared everything away. No one believed that at that time. The town just issued a wolf warning some days later, and it wasn't even the first time they came into town. So no one got too worked up about it. That story made a lot more sense now. Its skin was of a dark tone. More specifically, it reminded me of the dark blue color fingers turn when they get frostbite. It also had this weird quality of blending with the darkness, like a camouflage of some sort, but for shadows. The edges of the body kept blending with the darkness of the asphalt. Where I live nights are very dark, so that's probably why I couldn't notice it in time to react. The road I travel for work or go home is full of blind turns, and it's while I was driving on one of those that the accident happened. But I think that even if I had enough time, I wouldn't be able to see it anyway. You could have it right beside you and not notice it if it was just slightly dark outside. But at that point, you'd probably be dead anyway. I crouched to inspect it. Its skin was harder and colder than anything I had ever felt on a living being before, And the smell was, well, there was no smell. It felt like the perfect creature in some sense, perfect for hunting or surviving anything, the weather or attacked by other animals. It could show up and disappear like nothing ever happened. It would leave no trace, nothing to go off of. Its face laid against the concrete. I thought about it hard before taking a look. I already knew that if I had turned its head to take a look at it, I would never forget it, that it would haunt my dreams forever and never leave me alone. So I did it. I pushed its cranium to roll it over. There were some hairs on the top of its head, only a few strands. The face was like a skull. It reminded me a lot of human one, and I tried to believe it wasn't at that moment. It had holes where its eyes and nose should be, and its mouth was quite small, but struck in a malevolent grin. It looked like the head of a corpse left to rot, but that never fully did. I looked at its lifeless face for a while. I waited for it to open its eyes and looked at me, because I feared that if I turned around and headed back to my car, it would get me. That would rip me apart and steal my heart like it did with that beer. And then it twisted. A jolt of life coursed throughout its body. I dropped its head, fell back on the cement, and backed away as that thing, while struggling, began to stand, lifting one limb after another. It turned its head to look at me dead in the eyes. There was a dim light inside its eye sockets, and it was enough to read what it was feeling. That thing was full of anger, spite, and hate, but for some reason toward me, as if we had met before, as if I had wronged it even before hitting it with my car. It probably wasn't an accident after all. It was just trying to get close to me. A light coming from behind us interrupted the moment. It was my dad. When I didn't come home at the usual time, he set out to check if I hadn't crashed somewhere on the way home, since it wouldn't have been the first time. The time it took to turn my head away was enough. I felt a breeze and very light tapping on the road cement. When I turned back to look at that thing, it was gone. He asked me what I was doing in the middle of the road like that, and I couldn't really explain myself at that moment or at that time. I didn't know how to explain what happened, so I said that I had hit a deer, although the total front of my car raised some questions about the validity of my comms, since a deer could never render a car useless like that. Some time has passed since that night. I have been feeling its presence lately, growing closer and closer, and ever so evil. It lurks in the shadows, behind the trees, and always just outside of my view periphery. Some days ago, something struck a hunter. From what I was told, it's exactly like what happened to that bear once. Chest ripped open, missing heart, nothing else done to the body, and the place where they found him becoming an eerily deserted part of that woods. Apparently, that hunter was able to get a shot off. That hunter was my father. I told him of the accident a few days after the crash. My story didn't sound new to him. Our family already had an encounter with that spirit. The funeral was yesterday, and that thing showed up too, far away, just at the edge of the woods next to the cemetery. It wasn't even a surprise to me after that, after what I had been feeling lately. I expected it. It was standing in the snow of 2 feet, looking straight at me, mocking me, but it did look weakened. My dad had got him good, but I don't have much time left. But I know what to do. The night before he died, my father told me everything I needed to know, and more importantly, how to stop it. What I can tell you right now is that his name was Clint.
I went caving in the Nevada desert. Inside, I found piles of children's shoes and bones. I guess it's child abuse. We drove along the bright Nevada highway, the dry heat blowing in through the open windows like a furnace. In my little sedan, I had my wife of 10 years, Melissa, and our 2 children, Emily and Nate. Though they were twins in personality, They couldn't have seemed more different. Emily had always been outgoing and talkative, while Nate was highly introverted, a devoted reader at heart who could care less about his friends. With their wide blue eyes and dirty blonde hair, they resembled Melissa much more than me. "Are you guys excited or what?" I asked in a loud voice, yelling over the roaring wind. The air conditioner in my car hadn't been working well for a few months. Now I regretted not fixing it. "I am. I love caves," Emily said excitedly. Nate only grunted, staring fixedly down at one of Nietzsche's work, Beyond Good and Evil. For a 9-year-old, Nate seemed eerily smart. He had a mind like a camera, and always read far above his age level. "I hope there is no spiders in it, like last time," Melissa moaned in the passenger seat, her blue eyes sparkling mischievously. "Those things were bigger than my face." I shuddered slightly at the recollection of the brown recluses we had encountered in the last cave. I never much liked snakes and spiders, especially when they hide in dark spaces, waiting for a human to walk right into them. Brown recluses especially look like something from a nightmare to me, some hellish evolutionary system that produced monsters. Better those than rattlesnakes, I said, seeing the sign of a head reading, 1 mile to Sandstone Nature Preserve. To get to the cave, we would like to have hiked 20 minutes through the flat, packed earth of Nevada. "I don't really know about that," Melissa said. "A nest of brown recluses or black widows, or a nest of rattlesnakes with both will kill you. God, what a shitty way to go there." Melissa had heard about this cave from a friend at work. He had called it Sandstone Cave. He promised it stood far off the beaten path, and that almost nobody knew about it. He had given her a hand-drawn map, though it seemed like a fairly straight shot to the cliffs. As we parked in that dirt plot, sharp stones crunching under the car's tires, Melissa pulled the map out. "Jesus, Carlos, writing is so goddamn bad," she said, squinting as she put the map up to her face. I loved seeing her high cheekbone, pale face squeezed into a ludicrous expression. She gave me a dirty look. "I think you just need glasses," I said, putting an arm around her. Emily laughed in the back, a high-pitched, energetic sound that matched her bubbly personality. "My teacher said that when you get old, your eyes and ears stop working," she said. "Maybe Mom's just too old. Her eyes are falling apart like an old car." "See what you have started," Melissa said, giving me a crooked half-smile. Together we got out of the car, grabbing supplies from the trunk. Extra batteries, food, water, and a first aid kit. Nate and Emily each took a small pack of their own. If somehow, God forbid, someone got separated, I didn't want them stumbling through the pitch-black cave, calling and screaming at the darkness like panicked animals. Just the thought sent waves of dread rippling down my spine. We walked quickly and determinedly along the bare dirt trail. It wound its way through the hard-packed earth, serpentine and twisting. Large rocks that looked like they were dropped by giants started appearing along the sides, followed by steeper and steeper cliffs of red sandstone. "This is truly amazing," Melissa said excitedly. "I can't believe how empty this place is. We have this whole park to ourselves. It's so beautiful here." "It's pretty far off the beaten trail," I answered. "I doubt these trails are even." "Oh shit," Melissa screamed, jumping back suddenly. I jerked, twisting my head in confusion. Stunned, leafless bushes grew along the dark, cool patches under the cliffs that loomed overhead on both sides. And then I saw it, a dark brown silhouette, curled up into a spiral. It blended in with the sand and shadows. The snake hissed, his forked tongue flicking in and out as it stared between me and Melissa with his slitted reptilian eyes. A rattlesnake, I said, putting my arms out and pushing the two kids back without thinking. I saw the rattlesnake looked young and small, certainly not a full-grown adult. Like many juvenile rattlesnakes, its rattler probably hadn't fully developed yet, which made them far more dangerous in their deathly silence. If Melissa hadn't seen it, I might have stepped on the thing's tail. Its slitted eyes glittered with daring and fearlessness. I felt speechless, and Melissa had turned and started jogging back in the other direction. Abruptly, I felt a small body push past me. To my horror, I saw Nate approaching the rattlesnake, carrying a long, thick branch with a fork at the end. "Nate!" I yelled in panic. "Get back here!" He calmly continued staring at the snake as it shook its tail furiously, its fangs swiveling out like switchblades. Drops of venom fell from them. The snake opened its mouth wide, showing its cottony white gums. Keeping a safe distance, Nate pushed it back by the neck. The snake writhed and hissed, twisting its body in rapid figure eights. It beat at the stick over and over, its thin, flat head jerking out in multiple rapid strikes. Nate threw the stick in the opposite direction. The snake flew through the air, landing 10 feet away. It slithered away into the brush, disappearing from view within a moment. Rattled by the experience, I stood shaking and hyperventilating in the same spot for a long time. Emily had fallen far back with Melissa, their eyes wide and filled with fear. Both of them feared snakes even more than I did. Only Nate seemed totally calm as he survived me. Only Nate seemed totally calm as he surveyed me. "It's gone," he said. "We can go now. I think I can see the opening of the cave from here." Looking up, I realized he was right. A few hundred paces away stood a massive, jagged hole in the shape of a screaming mouth. It reminded me of the cavernous mouth of some toothless old man, magnified to monstrous proportions, black and empty and formed into a silent scream. We walked together in silence. The entrance grew larger with every step. As we drew nearer, I saw it stood nearly 5 times the height of a man. Nate's eyes gleamed excitedly. "When you stare into the abyss stares into you," he said as he stared intently into the screaming mouth of the cave. I glanced at him. "What does that even mean?" I asked, feeling out of my element. "When you stare into the dark recesses of your mind, the meaninglessness and pain and insanity that follows every person like a shadow, then it stares back. The dark places of the mind have eyes of their own. There's lots of them. And when you stare into them, they stare just as deeply back to you," he said, reciting his knowledge of Nietzsche's philosophy with a simple ease. "Well, that's all, Morvid," Melissa said, rolling her eyes. Nate and I led the way into soapstone cavern. The air felt cold and damp. Currents blew out from passageways deep under the earth, smelling slightly of sulfur and algar. "This cave smells funny," Emily whispered, wrinkling her small nose. "It's probably just subterranean rivers or lakes," I said. I noticed how our voices echoed down the cavern, eerily bouncing off the rocks until the words became nothing more than shadows of whispers. We pulled on our LED headlamps as the last of the sunlight died at the threshold. The path curved sharply to the right up ahead, covered in stalagmites and stalactites that jarred out like fangs from the wet, gleaming rock. We walked for about 15 minutes. Melissa ended up getting bored and walking slightly ahead of us, as she was by far in the best shape and never got winded. So she was the first to notice the extremely disturbing sights we would find in this cave. "What the fuck?" she yelled loudly. What is that? I jogged forward, turning a sharp corner to see her staring open-mouthed at a mountain of children's shoes piled up on the right side of the tunnel. Some looked almost brand new, while others looked used and worn. The styles ranged over decades, and the size varied from those of a toddler to those of a teenager. In many of the shoes I saw yellowed leg bones jutting out. The pile loomed 5 feet in the air, containing probably thousands of shoes. "Oh, Jesus Christ!" I whispered, and I was horrified. "Who put this here? Is this some sort of weird memorial, or is it something? There's legs in some of the shoes." "Daddy," Emily said nervously. "Whose legs are those, Daddy?" "No, honey, those must be animal bones," Melissa exclaimed, putting a thin hand around Emily's shoulder and putting her close. "Just animal bones." I took a step closer to the pile, inspecting the bones. I couldn't tell at a single glance if the bones were animal or human. They all looked small, child-sized perhaps, but maybe they could have come from a young deer or a coyote. "Well, I'm not sure if those are animal bones," I said. "I think we should turn around. This is creepy as hell. For all we know, this could be the trophy side of some sick fuck who kills kids and steals their shoes. We should have the police come in and see if they think the bones are human or not. What if a serial killer put this here? What if this is his shrine to death?" "Dad," Nate said with a note of fear in his voice, "I had really heard there. There is someone else here." I spun around, my heart frantically beating in my chest as the gravity of his words sunk in. Beyond the shallow heads of my family, I saw the dim beam of a flashlight bouncing up and down the caravan walls. A rising sense of panic gripped me, with my nerves spurting. I grabbed Melissa's arm. "We need to go. We don't know who the fuck that is. They might be the sick of putting the shoes here." Stumbling alongside Nate and Emily, we took off, heading deeper into the winding tunnels of soapstone cavern, where further evidence of atrocities waited like a guillotine blade ready to fall. "Run as fast as you can," I told the kids, pushing them forward. Our headlamps bounced off the jagged rocks forming the sharp walls of the cavern. They started closing in on us. The tunnel rapidly narrowed from a wide path 10 feet across into something the width and height of a coffin. We had to slow down and go single file. I glanced back, seeing the glare of the flashlight emerging from around the corner. "He's almost here," I whispered, urging them on. The kids squeezed through with no problem, but Melissa and I kept getting caught on the sharp rocks that sliced at our clothes and flesh. The tunnel seemed to only get narrower as it turned 90 degrees. "Hey!" A low, hoarse voice yelled from behind us. "Don't go in there. Just wait." The flashlight landed directly on me. I pushed myself forward with Melissa only inches in front of me, stumbling into her back. As we navigated the turn, the flashlight beam fell further behind us, but it only be a matter of a minute until the unknown figure caught up with me. In front of us, Emily gave a panicked shriek. Nate and Emily stood, shell-shocked and still, their mouths open in identical expressions of horror. I followed their gaze, seeing a sight from hell. An infant with bone-white skin and a cavernous, toothless mouth like that of an obscene old man slung across the wall. It scurried forward like a salamander, clinging to the irregular granite surface with no apparent effort. Its naked hands and feet were formed into sharp, claw-like points. It gave a scream like a witch being burned alive, gurgling with deep, resonant notes of agony. Its naked body seemed twisted and deformed, and patches of what looked black mold ate away at its arms and legs. Go back, Melissa wailed. slamming into me in her frantic attempt to move away from the abomination. Oh God, go back. What the hell is that thing going here? It never stopped screaming, never paused to inhale, as if it didn't need to breathe at all. I didn't need any motivation. I shoved my body through the tight tunnel, forming my way back around the steep corner. The shrinking infant was only a stone's throw away. Nate and Emily, who pushed forward at Melissa's heels. I felt new scraps and grasses tear across my body from the sharp rocks of the cave. But with the rush of adrenaline, I wouldn't notice the pain until later. As soon as we made it around the corner, the shrinking cut off as suddenly as if a record had been stopped. A man in front of us, blocking the way. He had a rounded moon face and close-cropped black hair. His dark eyes twinkled merrily as he shone the flashlight into our faces. "Carlos," Melissa asked. She constantly checked her back. The panic I still felt was reflected in her pale face and why shell-shocked her eyes. "Carlos, thank God you're here. Something is very wrong with this place." Carlos only gave a faint smile at this, but it didn't reach his black eyes. "I see you brought your children," he said in a strange, disjointed cadence. "More children in the shadows." His voice came out low and husky. He stared constantly down at Nate and Emily. "Did you hear what I said?" Melissa said. "We need to get the hell out of here." Carlos' gaze never faltered from the kids. With his thin lips pressed into a tight grimace, he took a predatory step forward, keeping his right hand in his black jeans pocket. "Stay back," I hissed. My intuition screamed at me that something was wrong. I pushed the kids back, not sure if the greater threat came from behind us or in front of us. "If you take one more step." I saw a silver flash in the white glare of the headlamp. Carlos pulled out a knife, slashing out at my throat. I fell back, hearing the blade whiz past my skin. I slammed hard into the wet granite floor, feeling the wine get knocked out of me. Melissa continued pushing the kids back. I could hear her panicked breathing, see the drops of sweat falling off her nose. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Carlos struck out with the knife, slicing it right to left and left to right in a manic frenzy. I heard a wet thud above me, followed by a bubbling grunt. Melissa fell down next to me, her throat cut from ear to ear. Blood spurted from the open gash as she choked, coughing and gurgling with the last of her dying energy. Within seconds, she had gone still. Her pupils started dilating, her lips fading to a suffocating bluish cast. I crawled frenetically away, pushing myself up in a blind panic. The kids had disappeared around the corner, back in the direction of the welling. Bone-white infant, in the chaos of the moment, I had lost sight of them. Now a pure sense of panic gripped my heart. If I lost Melissa and the kids in one day, I might as well just go home and hang myself. I would have nothing left to live for after all. Carlos was a heavy-set man, and he had a difficult time navigating through the tight corners of the passage. Breathing heavily, still in shock over the death of my wife, I ripped my way through, seeing the silhouettes of Emily and Nate far ahead of me. I saw no sign of the strange demonic infant that had crawled the wall like a centipede. Thank God. The passageway rapidly opened up into a massive chamber that echoed with every footfall. I glanced back, seeing Carlos' flashlight moving not far behind me. Nate and Emily screamed ahead of me. I sprinted forward, trying to get to them. "Dad, look," Emily cried, pointing at what lay at the end of the chamber. Dozens of human skeletons lay endlessly dreaming. Their corpses were tossed haphazardly into a pile, their limbs intertwined like rats in a rat king. All of the bodies looked small, like those of children. The bones began to shake and rattle. The yellowed cracks whined as they danced. jumping up and down as if they were possessed. From the pitch blackness at the end of the chamber, more corpse white figures of children stepped out, their pale, cataract eyes haunted and dead. Carlos came around the corner, screaming with insanity and bloodlust. He had the gore-stained knife raised high. He saw me, his eyes looking dark and hooded as he sprinted forward. The bodies of the children slunk forwards, some of them creeping along the walls and ceiling, others dragging broken legs behind them. I thought they would come for me and Nate and Emily, surround us and murder us, but they streamed past us like a river rushing past a boulder. I saw the scarring and vein slinking along the wall, its cavernous mouth opened wide in a silent scream. It hit Carlos in a blur, shattering his leg with a sickening crack. His knee exploded in a shower of gore and bone splinters. He fell on his side, his sick, confused willing intensifying as more of the undead children surrounded him. They stood over him like grim reapers, staring down at him with their pale, blind eyes. "You killed us," the tallest of them said. It looked like a teenager, a boy with rotted stripes of blue jeans and a t-shirt still hanging to his mummified flesh. His lipless mouth chattered with every word. His voice sounded like an autumn wind blowing through dry leaves. "But in this place nothing ever really dies. We live in the shadows here, and it feeds us, and we feed it. And you too will feed it here." "No," Carlos whimpered, trying to crawl away. "Get away from me, you are dead. I killed you." The teenage corpse gave a grim, lipless smile as the welling infant slithered forward toward Carlos' face. It stopped mere inches from it, its white eyes staring blindly into his black ones. Without warning, it started crawling under his body, ripping at his chest with its sharp claws. With a gurgling banshee wail, it winded the hole, snapping the bones like twigs as it shoved its widening abyss of a mouth deep inside. Carlos gave a scream of abject agony and terror as the infant bored into his body like a screaming tick. I saw its thin, emaciated legs slipping off the wet carbon floor before they disappeared from view moments later. Carlos coughed up blood. He stared up sightlessly at the jerked ceiling as his breaths came slower and slower. With a last chattering of teeth and a clenching of fists, he emitted a choking death gasp and lay still. I put my arms around Nate and Emily, pulling us close together. I could feel their small bodies trembling with fear. Their skin felt cold and clammy under my palms. They looked up at me with dilated pupils, looking more like frightened animals than children at that moment. "Daddy, I'm scared," Emily whispered in a quivering voice. "I want to go to home." "We will go home, I promise," I said. Thought in reality I could do no such thing, for all I knew, we'd all die within the next few moments. I was afraid to look up from the faces of my children, afraid to look of a semicircle undead abominations staring at us with their milk-white skin and filmy ghost eyes. "Is this staring into the abyss?" Nate asked. "Am I going to come out on the other side?" I opened my mouth to respond when an icy hand grabbed my shoulder. Its claw-like fingers dug into my flesh, turning me around. Standing in front of me stood the apparent leader of the undead children, the teenage boy with the rotted clothes. "A price must be paid," the chalk-white corpse of the teenager said. "A life for a life. We have saved you from the killer of children, the hunter of men. We want one of yours to stay with us forever. We grow lonely here in the endless darkness, surrounded only by bones and stone tombs." Emily and Nate stood hugging each other, looking small and helpless. I felt like I would throw up. "You will have to kill me before you take one of my children," I hissed. "That monster already killed my wife. He murdered all of us, too," the boy gurgled in his low, airy voice, slowly, methodically tearing off limbs and cutting out eyes with fanatical obsession. He learned how to make it last. Decades of work, hunting, and tearing apart the most defenseless and innocent. But this changes nothing. We will not let you live until the choice is made. "I will do it," Nate said calmly. Stepping forward, I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Like hell you will," I yelled. "We are all living right now, and if any of you try to stop me, I will kill you." "You cannot kill what is already dead," the boy said as dozens more corpses scattered forwards behind him. Somewhere the naked bodies of toddlers and infants, murdered in their innocence. Many had deep slits on their throats and Glasgow smiles curved into their cheeks. They all showed growths of black mold that covered their bodies like hellish tattoos. Their pale white eyes looked filmy and lifeless, covered in cataracts and decayed into blindness. "It's okay, Dad," Nate said, looking up at me with love in his eyes. "I'm not afraid of the darkness. I know it has eyes and it stares back at me, but I'm not afraid. It's part of us, too." Pale, freezing hands grabbed me from all sides. They held me back as Nate meekly followed the boy into the darkness, looking like a lamb being led to slaughter. Nate turned off his headlamp, looking back at me one last time as he threw it down on the ground. They disappeared from view into the shadows at the end of the chamber. As soon as the blackness swallowed them up like a hungry mouth, I felt the hands release. I looked back, seeing the walking corpse of the children had all disappeared. Now only Millie stood there, small and trembling. I ran to her, throwing my arms around her and hugging her tightly. "We need to go find Nate," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "We need to go deeper into the tunnel and get Nate back. We can't let them take him." "Daddy, he's already gone," she said, crying and shaking. I could feel her heart racing in her small, fragile chest. "No, he's not," I screamed, pulling her forward by her arm. "We need to catch up with him." We sprinted through the massive chamber, seeing the passageway abruptly narrow. Ahead of us, the cave suddenly ended in a hole that went straight down into the earth. I shone my light down, trying to see the bottom, but it appeared to go thousands of feet deep. From far below us, I thought I caught glimpses of pale, cavernous faces staring up at us with dead and with the white eyes. Emily and I ran out of that cave of horrors, past the pale corpse of Melissa and the spreading pool of blood underneath her slashed throat. The cave floor sucked it up hungrily, drinking every drop until it turned into a clothed sandstone hollow wreathing her body. We got the police there as fast as we could, telling them that Nate was lost in the cave and about the murder of my wife. They sent rescue units down into the black pit at the end of the chamber. I heard later that out of over a dozen people sent down, only one of them returned alive. His hair had gone white with shock. Totally insane, he was unable to tell anyone what he had seen down there or what had happened to the rest of his unit. As far as I know, he is still in an asylum on this day. The police found evidence of hundreds of murders in the cave, committed over a period of at least 30 years. Carlos' body had also mysteriously disappeared, leaving only drops of blood and pieces of torn rat intestine behind. To this day I still have constant nightmares about that place. I see Melissa's dilated pupils and slashed throat, her fingernails and lips turning blue. I see Nate as a bone-white, a staggering thing with filmy eyes. And in my nightmares, those blind cataract eyes are always staring back at me.